One evening, one meeting, one sentence that will change everything. He was certain. Over the years of friendship, they had endured everything imaginable. But across the table sat not a friend, but a man holding the key to the destruction of an entire world. With a single confession, trust, love, and loyalty would be erased. Everything that once seemed unshakable would shatter like fragile porcelain teetering on the edge. When reality begins to crack at the seams, only one question remains. How much betrayal can you stay silent about? And what is the price of a truth more painful than any lie? Sometimes, you have to lose everything to see your true self for the first time. Where words cut deeper than any blade and glances expose your weakest parts, begins something no one can ever be prepared for. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watched this video. I value every one of your comments. So, let's get started. Miles never imagined that a casual message from Caleb inviting him out for a drink would set in motion a revelation that would upend everything he thought he knew. Their friendship had been a lifelong constant, forged in childhood scuffles, shaped by reckless teenage years, and deepened through honest, vulnerable talks in adulthood. To Miles, Caleb was more than just an old friend. He was family. A fixture of loyalty, someone he trusted without question. So when the text came through, "Let's grab a drink, need to talk," Miles didn't hesitate. There was nothing unusual about it. But once they sat down together, something felt off. Caleb wasn't himself. He dropped into the seat across from Miles, fiddling absently with the bottle cap, his eyes glued to his phone, avoiding eye contact. Miles tried to inject some energy into the moment. He cracked jokes about his job, recapped his recent weekend away with Leah, laughed at his own anecdotes. But Caleb wasn't biting. His replies were brief, hollow, missing their usual spark. Realizing that pushing wouldn't help, Miles backed off. He gave Caleb time, hoping the silence would open a door. After a few swigs of beer and a long, labored breath, Caleb finally met Miles's eyes. His expression was weighted, burdened by something he'd clearly been holding on to for too long. The stillness between them thickened until Caleb finally broke it. "There's something I need to tell you," he said plainly. Miles shifted in his seat, unease rising fast. He couldn't place why, but his pulse quickened. Caleb shut his eyes for a moment, rubbed his face as if bracing himself, and went on. "I saw Leah. She was with another guy." The words struck like a physical blow. Miles sat motionless, his mind scrambling to make sense of it. Caleb continued quickly, seeing the disbelief in Miles's face. He explained how, a few weeks earlier, after a particularly rough day, he had wandered into a quiet bar he'd never been to before, the kind of place tucked away from the world. He just wanted a moment to himself. He'd picked a secluded table, ordered a drink, and was half lost in thought when he spotted someone, that made him freeze. Across the room sat Leah. Beside her was a man Caleb didn't recognize, and their hands were entwined. His first thought was that he must be mistaken. Maybe it only looked like her, but the longer he watched, the more certain he became. It was Leah. Then she leaned over and kissed the man, not casually, not with friendliness. It was a kiss filled with meaning, intimate, sure, unambiguous. There was no mistaking it. Miles interjected, desperate for another explanation. Was Caleb absolutely certain? Could he have been wrong? But Caleb didn't waver. "Miles, I know what I saw. It was her." He admitted that in the moment, he had frozen. The idea of taking a photo hadn't even crossed his mind. He'd just sat there, stunned. Leah hadn't looked nervous or out of place. If anything, she seemed at ease, comfortable, like this wasn't the first time. It didn't feel spontaneous. It looked like something familiar. Eventually, overwhelmed, Caleb had quietly paid his bill and left. Leah never noticed him. In the days that followed, Caleb struggled with whether to say anything. A part of him was terrified of shattering Miles's world. But the idea of hiding it, of keeping such a painful truth from someone he loved like a brother, gnawed at him. As he spoke, Miles felt like the ground beneath him had crumbled. Every sentence added weight to the suffocating pressure building in his chest. He thought of Leah, the woman he'd imagined his future with, the partner he trusted above all. The thought of her holding hands with someone else, kissing him like that, it didn't add up. He searched his memory for signs he might have missed, any indication that something had changed, but he came up empty. Leah had seemed the same, attentive, loving, genuine. Now Caleb sat across from him, eyes glassy, voice raw with sorrow, telling him a truth he never could have anticipated. Miles couldn't find any words. He stared at the condensation sliding down the bottle in front of him, hands unsteady, throat tight. Caleb reached over, placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, man," he said quietly. "I didn't want to be the one to say it, but I couldn't keep it from you." In that moment, Miles understood. Life, as he'd known it, had changed. The person who had stood beside him through every high and low had just handed him a truth too devastating to ignore. There was no more room for uncertainty, only the path forward, whatever that would look like. Miles knew he had to see the truth with his own eyes. He had to confront it, no matter how unreal it still felt. Over the next few days, he tried to push Caleb's words out of his mind, tried to force himself back into the rhythm of normal life. But the image refused to disappear. It replayed in his head over and over, raw and relentless, a wound that wouldn't close. More than anything, he wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, something simple, explainable, and innocent. Perhaps Caleb had gotten it wrong, seen things out of context, but the way Caleb had described what he'd witnessed, the vivid detail, the steady conviction, left no room for comforting illusions. From that moment on, uneasiness began seeping into the rhythm of his daily life. Every goodbye kiss, each sleep well text, every girls' night Leah claimed to have, they all started to feel scripted, like fragments of a carefully constructed facade concealing something far more troubling. The weight of uncertainty was unbearable. Miles felt like he was drowning in doubt, tormented by possibilities he couldn't confirm. He knew he couldn't confront Leah based on a hunch, not without something tangible, something irrefutable. He needed truth, visible, undeniable truth. Quietly, without revealing his growing suspicions, he began to craft a plan. He told Leah he'd be away for the next week, tied up with a series of crucial business meetings out of town. She accepted it without question, gave him a warm hug, and wished him success like she always did. What she didn't know was that Miles had no intention of leaving the city. While she believed he was hundreds of miles away, he would be on a mission to uncover what had been eating away at him for weeks. The night before his fake trip, Leah came home from work, dropped her purse on a chair, and headed straight to the shower, the same routine she followed every evening. Miles saw his opening. He retrieved the GPS tracker he had purchased earlier that week, its packaging still hidden at the back of his closet. His hands shook as he made his way into the garage. Her car sat there, unmoved. Working quickly, he opened the passenger side door, knelt down, and secured the tracker beneath the seat, making sure it was concealed from view. Before heading back inside, he paused, the guilt hitting him in full force. It felt like betrayal, a violation of the trust they'd spent years building. But beneath that guilt was a deep resolve. He had to know. One way or another, the truth had to surface. The next morning, suitcase in hand, he walked out the front door and stepped into his own deception. He kissed Leah gently on the cheek, told her to have a good week, and she responded with a carefree smile, completely unaware. As he drove away, turning the first corner, he pulled over and opened the tracking app on his phone. Her car was still parked at home. The device was working perfectly. Miles checked into a modest hotel not far from their house, close enough to keep an eye on things, but far enough to remain hidden. He kept up with his remote work during the day, but his real focus was the tracker, which he checked constantly. For the first few days, everything looked routine. Leah went to work, made a stop at the grocery store, hit the gym in the evening. Nothing out of place. There were moments when Miles began to doubt his own fears, wondering if Caleb had made a mistake, or if maybe there had never been anything to worry about at all. By Wednesday night, a quiet optimism started to build. Maybe he had let paranoia take control. Maybe it was time to remove the tracker and let go. But Thursday shattered that hope. At around 8 p.m., the tracker indicated movement. Her car had left the driveway. Miles followed its location as it traveled familiar streets, stopping outside a bar, the exact one Caleb had described in such disturbing detail. His stomach turned. Without hesitation, Miles grabbed his keys and drove to the spot, parking a short distance away with a clear line of sight to the entrance. Peering through the window, he spotted her immediately. Leah was seated at a table, wearing one of the dresses she reserved for special occasions, the kind she wore to impress. She looked composed, comfortable, almost as if the place was familiar to her. Then, a man entered. Miles watched as the stranger strolled casually through the door and walked straight to Leah's table. What came next made Miles's blood run cold. They greeted each other with a kiss. Not a shy, hesitant kiss, but one that spoke of familiarity and routine. It was slow, deliberate, intimate. A kiss born of habit, not discovery. The air seemed to leave Miles's lungs. He stayed put, gripping the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the two inside. They talked, smiled, touched each other across the table with quiet ease. Around 30 minutes passed before they stood and left the bar, walking together toward Leah's car. Their steps matched, close, like a couple deeply in sync. At the vehicle, she opened the back door. The man got in first. Then she followed, closing the door behind them. Miles sat paralyzed, every muscle tense, staring at the car as if it might disappear. Their silhouettes shifted inside, close together, unmistakably intimate. For a split second, he considered driving away, turning his back on the scene before it broke him completely. But grief, fury, and betrayal surged like a tide. He climbed out of his car, crossed the parking lot in a blur of emotion, and pounded on the window with a force that made both of them jump. Leah's face turned pale, her eyes widened, mouth slightly open, caught mid-excuse she hadn't yet invented. The truth was painted clearly across her expression. There was nothing to explain. He had seen everything. Miles exploded. All the anger, all the betrayal he had buried deep inside came pouring out in a storm of raw emotion. He shouted, hurled accusations with a voice that trembled with pain. The noise drew attention. People nearby froze, watching the drama unfold like a scene from a tragedy. Some whispered, others stared in silence. Miles didn't notice. He didn't care. He hadn't come for apologies. He had come for the truth. And now it stood before him, ruthless, undeniable, and final. He didn't let her utter a single word. Leah stood motionless, caught in a storm of confusion and shame, while the man in the passenger seat beside her avoided Miles's eyes entirely, his posture rigid with guilt. Without offering another glance, Miles turned away, climbed into his car, and drove off. His mind was certain. There was no return from this. He pulled out of the lot and drove directly to his hotel. Once inside his room, he packed swiftly, tossing clothes into his suitcase with a kind of robotic focus. There was no hesitation, no pause to reflect. He already knew this part of his life was over. Not long after, he was back home. He walked in, dropped his bag in the center of the living room, and stood still, eyes locked on the door, waiting. The familiar hum of a car entering the garage reached him minutes later. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with unwavering determination. When Leah stepped through the threshold and saw him standing there, her face changed. Shock first, then dread. Tears filled her eyes in an instant. She lifted a trembling hand to her mouth, as if trying to hold back the sobs already rising in her throat. "Miles," she said, voice quivering, taking cautious steps forward, repeating his name as though it might reach the part of him that once loved her. But Miles remained still, expression cold, gaze locked and unyielding. She moved to touch him, perhaps to plead, but he stepped away and pointed to the door. His voice came sharp, edged with finality. "Leave, now." Leah opened her mouth to respond, to explain, but his voice cut through hers like a blade. "I saw everything, Leah. The car, the bar. Don't lie to me. You destroyed it all." She crumpled, covering her face with both hands, overcome with sobs that shook her whole body. Still, she tried to speak, to salvage something from the wreckage, but Miles wasn't listening. He stormed to the door, yanked it open, and shouted again, louder this time. "Out!" The noise carried. Neighbors stepped onto porches, shadows moved behind blinds, unseen eyes watching as their private collapse unfolded in full view. Leah, defeated, grabbed her bag and inched toward the door, her face soaked with tears. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back one last time. Miles stood unmoved, arms folded across his chest, eyes unreadable as he watched her leave. She exited, got into her car, and drove away. When she was gone, he slammed the door shut and stood in the silence, chest heaving, struggling to calm the storm inside. The hurt was sharp and immediate, but beneath it sat a firm resolve. Tomorrow, he would begin the process, consult a lawyer, file the paperwork, untangle their finances, and request a restraining order to keep her legally distant. Her betrayal hadn't just fractured their marriage, it had obliterated the trust and respect it once rested on. By dawn, every plan had already been put into action. The legal wheels turned. Divorce documents were submitted, bank accounts divided, and the restraining order granted. Every thread tying them together was being methodically cut. For Miles, the relationship was dead in every way. Though pain lingered, it no longer governed him. All that remained was clarity, a need to walk away, to leave the ruin behind. A few days later, his attorney reached out. Leah's legal team had filed a motion to dispute the restraining order, claiming she posed no threat and only wished to speak, to explain herself. The judge appeared ready to agree. Miles listened without reacting. Then, to his own surprise, he consented to lift it. Not because he wanted reconciliation, that door was firmly shut, but the need for legal boundaries now seemed irrelevant. There was nothing left to guard. Everything meaningful, faith, communication, love, had already been reduced to ashes. The next day, while Miles sorted through legal documents at the kitchen table, his phone rang. Leah's name appeared on the screen. He hesitated, hand hovering between decline and silence. But something within him compelled him to answer. He needed closure, real, unclouded, final. Her voice came softly, thin and trembling, as if the act of calling had drained her strength. "Miles," she breathed. He didn't respond, allowing the silence to speak for him. Then, all at once, she began to speak, fast, pleading, as though afraid the words might betray her if she stopped. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I felt lost, so completely alone. There's no excuse, I know that. But the simple fact is, I lost myself. And when I finally opened my eyes, the damage had already been done." She paused, searching his expression for any glimmer of recognition, hoping he was truly taking in her words. Her tone softened as she continued. "I never wanted to hurt you. That was never the plan. I wasn't trying to destroy everything we built. I needed to feel alive again, to feel something that was real. And now, I've ruined it." Miles took a long, deliberate breath and shut his eyes, as if anchoring himself against the storm rising within. When he finally spoke, his voice was even and composed, though his heart felt like it was caving in. "I hear you," he said in a low tone. She leaned in, voice trembling with urgency. "I need you to understand. I regret it. All of it. If I had the chance to do it over, I would choose differently. I did love you. I still do." That last confession escaped her lips as a whisper, soaked in remorse. But Miles didn't waver. He had heard enough to know that no amount of sorrow or lingering love could undo what had been broken. His reply came steady, not harsh, but resolute. "I loved you too, Leah. Deeply. But love, without respect, means nothing. You always knew that," he added. On the other end of the call, there was only silence, punctuated by shaky breaths, the kind that tremble on the edge of tears. Miles continued, his voice not bitter, just final. "I hope you find peace, truly. But from this point on, my life continues, without you." Then he ended the call, not waiting for a response. He sat frozen, phone still in hand, eyes fixed on nothing. Inside him, sorrow and relief twisted together. It was over. Not with chaos or shouting, but with quiet resolve. The kind of ending that didn't need drama or noise. In that stillness, Miles realized he no longer needed explanations. What he craved, and what he had finally found, was closure. The weeks drifted by. The divorce was finalized, and Leah never reached out again. One evening, Miles accepted an old offer from Caleb to meet for drinks, a routine they'd shared countless times before. It was their first time reconnecting since everything had fallen apart. They met at the usual spot, the bar where, not too long ago, Caleb had delivered the truth that changed everything. There was a somberness between them, but also a quiet solidarity, the kind born from shared history and recent heartache. After a few drinks, Caleb leaned forward, his gaze serious. "I've been holding on to something, waiting for the right moment to tell you. You deserve to know." Miles looked up, his expression calm, as though he'd already braced himself for whatever was coming. Caleb continued. "The guy Leah was seeing? It was Julian, her ex." Miles didn't even blink. His face held no shock, just the quiet acceptance of a man whose instincts had already filled in the blanks. Caleb went on. "And there's more. He's married, has been for a long time. 2 kids. Leah didn't even know." Miles slowly exhaled and leaned back in his seat. He dragged a hand down his face, the weight of the revelation sinking in. It hit hard, but not in the way he expected. Caleb watched him closely, then finished his thought. She gave up everything, for someone who was never going to choose her. A faint, bittersweet smile tugged at Miles's lips. It wasn't bitter, just reflective. He raised his glass, gently clinking it against Caleb's before taking a slow sip. Some people only recognize the damage they've done when the road back has already vanished. In that silent moment of shared understanding, something within Miles shifted. The pain had eased. What remained was clarity, and a firm, quiet belief that he was worth more than betrayal, more than regret. And for the first time, he truly felt ready to start again. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend, and if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.